Today I'm excited to show you how to complete the Blood Infusion quest, which is arguably the most difficult part of the legendary questline for Shadowmourne. This quest requires quite a bit of coordination to complete, which can make it difficult to puck. I'll show you how we two-man this quest in Miss Pandaria, but before we get too into things, let's take a step back to look at the overall strategy. In order to complete the quest, you have to defeat Blood Queen Lanethel after infusing Shadow's Edge with blood. This requires getting turned into a vampire 3 times and biting 3 different people. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to refer to the person that's trying to complete the quest with Shadow's Edge as the Infuser, and the other person as the DPS. In order to two-man this successfully, you're going to need 2 battle res, and that ends up meaning your raid composition needs to be a Death Knight and either a Shaman or a Warlock. There's also going to be a pretty high DPS requirement, but one way to mitigate this is by controlling Undead on a Plague Scientist and using his Plague Stream damage buff on the DPS. Now let's go over the actual strategy of the fight. To begin, you can both run in and start DPSing, but it's important that the Infuser keeps aggro, so they'll be the first one to get the Essence of the Blood Queen debuff. This debuff increases their damage, blah blah blah, but the important thing is that you have 1 minute before you're going to turn into a vampire. As long as the Infuser is doing everything correctly, meaning they have Shadow's Edge equipped and they're on the Blood Infusion quest, they should also see the Gushing Wound debuff, and you're going to want to pay attention to this because this will be your indicator that everything's going properly throughout the fight. As soon as the Infuser receives the Essence of the Blood Queen debuff, this is going to be one of your big DPS phases, and you have basically a minute of free DPS time to get the Blood Queen down as low as you possibly can. So at this point you probably want to lust use the Plague Stream buff and burn her down as much as possible. It's also important if you're using a Shaman as a DPS that they get aggro at this point, because they're going to want to die later on, and once they have the Essence of the Blood Queen debuff, their attacks don't cause aggro. A Warlock has a pretty big advantage here because they'll be able to life tap themselves to death. After 1 minute has passed, the Infuser is going to basically turn into a vampire, being under the effect of the Frenzied Bloodthirst debuff. And they're only going to have one ability, which is to bite someone else. And the only other person that's available is the DPS, so you need to bite them. The Infuser should see their Gushing Wound buff go up to 2 stacks, and the DPS should now have the Essence of the Blood Queen debuff. You can still DPS now, but it's going to heal the DPS, and the important thing is that the DPS needs to die and get rezzed before you get the Frenzied Bloodthirst again. After the DPS dies and gets battle rezzed, you can go back to DPSing until you need to repeat the process of biting again when you're under the Frenzied Bloodthirst buff, the DPS needing to die again, getting battle rezzed, and now when you're at this last stage you should have 3 stacks of the Gushing Wound debuff. Hopefully by this point you've got Blood Queen Lanethel pretty low on HP, because this is going to be your all-out burn phase at the end. Once the Infuser has 3 stacks of Gushing Wound and gets turned into a vampire for the last time, they need to bite the DPS, and then you're basically both going to have 1 minute to burn the boss down, or you'll fail, because you'll both get mind controlled and die. At this point there's supposed to be a buff called Thirst Quenched, saying that Shadow's Edge is infused with blood. However, recently it seems like a lot of people have been getting this bugged out where they don't actually get the Thirst Quenched buff. You'll see in my video I didn't have the Thirst Quenched buff when I defeated Blood Queen Lanethel, but I still qualified for the quest. So as long as you've been doing everything properly and you saw Gushing Wound stack from 3 and then disappear when it would have gone to 4, you should be okay. Okay, so now let's take a look at the actual encounter.